the air inside the luxury watch boutique. Kronos Elite was heavy with the costly scent of fine leather and the cold arrogance of polished steel. The loudest sound was the synchronized click of Swiss chronometers, a rhythm of precision and wealth that mocked the man standing near the entrance. His name was Elias. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a posture slightly stooped by the weight of years of manual labor beneath the sun. He wore heavily worn, mud-caked leather work boots and a faded canvas Lona jacket. His deep, tired blue eyes moved with the slow, considered pace of a man who spends his life observing the growth of crops, not the six-figure price tags. Elias did not look like a customer. He looked like an out-of-place element, a piece of rural debris carried in by the steady drizzle falling outside. He was there for one singular reason. His grandfather, a subsistence farmer who had taught him everything about the land, was dying. His grandfather had one sole treasure, a sturdy, antique Omega pocket watch given to him by his own father, but which was now stopped, its chain rusty and the glass face shattered. The old man's last request was to see the watch working again so I can count the seconds I have left. Elias had been told that Kronos Elite held the only certified watchmaker in the region capable of restoring a piece of that age and complexity. He took a hesitant step inside, and the subtle crunch of his boots on the polished wooden floor sounded like a sonic alarm. A slender, impeccably coiffed young salesman in a tight tweed waistcoat appeared immediately. This was Julian, the antagonist, a man who measured human worth by the weight of the wrists they wore. Julian's gaze swept over Elias, the mud on the boots, the cheap fabric of the jacket, and his upper lip curled in disgust. "May I help you?" Julian asked, his voice polished and sharp as a shard of glass. It was not an offer of service, but a challenge. Elias pulled the pocket watch from his coat, holding it reverently in the palm of his hand. The piece looked tiny and humble against the calloused pad of his thumb. "Yes, this watch. It is old. My grandfather's. It needs repair." "The mechanism is stopped," Elias said, his voice low and gravelly, more accustomed to speaking to livestock than to men in tweed. Julian took the watch with 2 fingers as if it were a soiled insect and brought it to the light. "Oh dear God, it's an Omega 30 series, quite ... vintage." He infused the word with contempt. "This isn't just old, sir. It's broken, filthy, and probably mold-infested." He handed it back to Elias almost violently. "And please, your dirty feet are ruining my store. Do not step on that Persian rug. If you're here only for repair, the workshop is in the back by the service entrance. We don't handle rusty relics out here in the main showroom." The humiliation struck Elias with the force of a punch to the gut. He felt the heat rise in his face, but his grandfather's pain was more urgent than his pride. He gave a slight stiff bow, took the watch, and headed toward the service door. Elias's daily struggle was genuine. He was indeed a farmer, but not an ordinary one. He was the sole heir and administrator of Snow Jorge Farm, the largest and most profitable organic grain producer in the state. His family had faced setbacks, the sick grandfather, a recent drought, but they still owned significant land. However, a youthful trauma had taught Elias to value anonymity above all else. When he was young, his family was targeted in a kidnapping attempt, and the event caused him to develop a deep disdain for ostentation. He lived sparsely, deliberately hiding his immense wealth beneath the canvas and the mud. As he entered the workshop, he accidentally bumped into a metal shelving unit. To prevent it from crashing down, Elias reacted with surprising speed and strength, his large fingers enveloping the frame and halting it with effortless precision. He did not move like a farmer who merely tends the earth. He had the brute force and quick reaction of an elite former athlete, micro-reveal number 1. In fact, he abandoned a promising collegiate weightlifting career after the family incident. Deep in the back, he found the master watchmaker, a kind old man named Mr. Ivo, who looked at the Omega and saw history, not rust. "Yes, I can fix it, my son. It will take 3 days." "It's delicate work," Ivo said with a warm voice. Elias smiled, the first time since he had entered the store. "Thank you, my grandfather. He needs it, of course." "Come back on Monday," Ivo replied. Elias left the shop, but the humiliation from Julian, the way he was made to feel small because of a little mud in a coat, lingered. Julian had attacked not Elias, but the dignity of his life's work. Passing the storefront, Elias noticed Julian showing a diamond-encrusted watch to an equally arrogant-looking couple. Julian glanced up, caught Elias's eye, and performed a crude gesture, wiping the sole of his shoe on the air, signaling that Elias was still dirty and unwelcome. Elias stopped. He looked not at Julian, but at the immense glass facade of the shopping center where Kronos Elite was located. His grandfather always told him, "True revenge is not hurting your enemy, but proving they don't matter." Elias didn't want to hurt Julian, but he needed to prove to himself, and to his grandfather's spirit, that the dignity of canvas and mud was worth more than the sparkle of tweed. He turned his back on the watch boutique, his gaze fixed on a faded, almost rusty sign outside the mall that read, "Property for sale or lease by venture capital. Microveal number 2. Elias noticed the financial detail no one else did. He had an idea. An idea that would require all his capital, but one that would crush Julian's arrogance under the weight of a silent, monumental revenge. He would not return just to pick up a repaired watch. He would return to rewrite the rules of the entire game. I understand. I will remove the bolded subheadings and any visible division markers, presenting the text as a continuous narrative block for easier copying and pasting. While strictly adhering to the word count, around 3,000 words for this section, and the emotional arc, frustration, and rising mockery. The 3 days Elias spent waiting for his grandfather's watch felt like 3 years. He was physically present at the Snow Jorge farm, overseeing the late-season irrigation system. But his mind was constantly replaying the scene in the Kronos Elite boutique, the sneering voice of Julian, the cold dismissal, the humiliation of being told his labor-stained boots were ruining the store. Elias's quiet, humble demeanor wasn't merely a preference. It was a deeply ingrained survival mechanism. The Snow Jorge farm was immense, a sprawling empire of organic produce that grossed millions annually. Elias, who inherited the administration from his father, was quietly one of the wealthiest landowners in the entire county. However, the wealth had brought tragedy. When Elias was 17, his family made the mistake of publicly flaunting their first major business success. This display led to a targeted kidnapping attempt against Elias's younger sister, Sophia. Though the attempt was thwarted by their quick-thinking grandfather, the emotional scar never healed. His father, devastated and guilt-ridden, instituted a strict policy of radical humility and anonymity. Elias was pulled from his high-profile collegiate track where he was a champion heavyweight lifter, a talent that demanded attention, and was trained to manage the farm while obscuring his wealth. He became a ghost in his own life, a man whose hands knew the intimate feel of soil and tractor grease, deliberately hiding the fact that he signed checks worth millions. He never wore suits unless absolutely required for a banking visit, and even then, they were deliberately ill-fitting. The battered Lona jacket was his armor. The mud on his boots was his shield. He had traded a life of public glory for the quiet, difficult dignity of the land, carrying the trauma like a hidden weight. To execute his plan of material revenge, Elias needed immediate, massive liquidity. He drove his rusty 1990s pickup truck, which smelled faintly of diesel and hay, to the city's largest regional bank branch. He was there to meet Mr. Harrison, the senior branch manager, to arrange a colossal line of credit and leverage the farm's immense unmortgaged land value. Elias waited in the bank lobby for 40 minutes, shifting his weight awkwardly. Harrison finally summoned him. "Ah, Elias." Come in," Harrison said, his smile tight and practiced. He glanced pointedly at Elias's boots. "Do try to keep the mud off the carpet, old boy. High traffic area, you understand." Elias ignored the dig. He spread the meticulously prepared financial documents, complex balance sheets showing multi-year growth, diversified revenue streams, and minimal debt across the polished mahogany desk. "Mr. Harrison," Elias began, his voice flat and serious, "I need an immediate, secured, revolving line of credit. $50 million. I intend to leverage the Snow Jorge farm equity for a major, time-sensitive acquisition." Harrison stared at the papers, then back at Elias's faded denim shirt. He chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. "50 million, Elias? Are you serious?" "You want to buy a new combine harvester, not a small country," Harrison said, picking up the report with a look of theatrical disbelief. "Look, I know your family has land, but this kind of capital, You'd need audited statements, a full business plan, proof of high-level liquid assets, and frankly, a level of sophistication I don't see here. 50 million, Elias, is reserved for serious developers and corporate trusts, not for, let's be honest, mud farmers who pay with collateral, not competence." Elias's jaw clenched. Harrison's words echoed Julian's mockery, the assumption that the dirt on his clothes reflected the contents of his mind. Elias leaned forward, his massive frame dominating the desk. His eyes, usually soft, hardened with sudden, sharp intelligence. He used his knowledge of finance, a skill honed by years of managing his family's trust fund and negotiating complex futures contracts, to cut through the manager's condescension. "Mr. Harrison, my audited statement is right here. My farm's liquid assets exceed $20 million. My collateral is unencumbered land appraised at $150 million. And your bank's exposure would be less than 35%. I am asking for an ordinary, if large, commercial loan. If you cannot process this based on my appearance, I will simply take the entire Snow Jorge account, which generates over $1 million in annual interest for your branch, to the rival firm across the street by the end of the day. Harrison paled, realizing the quiet man in front of him wasn't an idiot, but a highly effective negotiator. He stammered, No, Elias, of course we can do it. It's just ... Your presentation was unconventional. I'll get the papers started immediately. Elias nodded curtly, securing the funds, but the sting of being underestimated fueled his resolve. 2 days later, the real estate agent, Miss Carol Vance, arrived at the Snow Jorge farm. She was sleek, aggressive, and dressed in a tailored suit, clearly annoyed by the detour into the countryside. She was there to discuss the property Elias was interested in, the failing downtown retail center, the Grand Galleria shopping mall where Kronos Elite was located. She found Elias not in a farmhouse office, but sitting on the tailgate of his rusty pickup, sketching complex diagrams on a clipboard while dirt clung to his knees. Mr. Elias Garrell said, her tone dripping with professional exasperation. I drove an hour and a half for this. The Galleria is a massive, multi-use commercial asset. It requires institutional investment. I showed you the prospectus. It's listed for $75 million. Are you sure you're even qualified to look at a property of this size? Elias looked up from his clipboard, his expression impassive. I secured the financing, Carol. $50 million line of credit backed by liquid assets. The remaining $25 million is cash on hand. I'm ready to make an offer. I've studied your prospectus, and frankly, the valuation is soft. Elias turned the clipboard toward her. It wasn't a crude sketch. It was a sophisticated financial and logistical breakdown of the mall's current state. He had identified 3 major structural flaws: poor traffic flow, which he redesigned with new entry points; high utility costs, which he solved with a proposed solar array; and most critically, a mismanagement clause in the existing tenant contracts that allowed an easy corporate takeover of leases. The current ownership is failing because they rely on outdated retail models, Elias explained, pointing to his diagram. The anchor tenants are mismatched and the service quarters are inefficiently designed. Your prospectus ignores the fact that a complete operational overhaul, paired with a mixed-use residential conversion on the top 2 floors, would triple the net operating income within 3 years. Your $75 million valuation is too low, but I'll only pay $68 million, due to the cost of the solar conversion I plan. Carol stared, her perfectly composed face cracking. This man, the one who smelled of earth and fertilizer, had just performed a superior financial and logistical analysis of a massive commercial property than her entire firm had. Mr. Elias, she whispered, stunned. You've completely re-engineered the property's flow. You're a developer? I'm a farmer, Elias corrected, standing up and towering over her. But I understand how things grow, Ms. Vance. The only difference between a successful farm and a successful property is which kind of seed you plant. Start the paperwork. My offer is $68 million. No counteroffers or I walk. Carol, defeated and awestruck, scrambled to retrieve her tablet. The rising frustration was now focused on the injustice of the world. Why did this humble man possess such devastating power? On Monday morning, Elias returned to the Kronos Elite boutique. He was dressed exactly the same, the muddy boots, the Lona jacket, the same air of humble, rural obscurity. Julian was standing at the front desk, polishing a display case. He spotted Elias immediately and smiled, a cold, superior flash of teeth. It's back for your rusty trinket, Mr. Mudd, Julian sneered, leaning over the counter. You know, Mr. Ivo took 3 hours just to clean the filth off the movement. Next time, try an actual jeweler, not a fancy store you can barely afford to stand in. Elias ignored the insults and went straight to Mr. Ivo's workshop. Ivo handed him the Omega. It was pristine, the hands sweeping with renewed vigor. It will last another 50 years now, my son. It just needed a little love, Ivo said, refusing payment. This one's on me. For your grandfather. Elias nodded, deeply grateful. He slipped the watch into his coat pocket. He had secured what he came for, his grandfather's dignity. Now it was time for his own. He walked back into the main boutique area. Julian was closing a sale with a wealthy, nervous-looking couple. Julian looked at Elias. Out, now. The stench of that coat is unprofessional. This is a high-end transaction. Elias stood his ground. I need to speak to the manager. Julian threw his head back and laughed. I am the assistant manager. What do you need, a complaint form? If it's about the dirt on your boots, I already told you. Elias held up a large, calloused hand, silencing Julian instantly. He looked past Julian, focusing on a plaque on the wall listing the store's corporate structure. Kronos Elite, subsidiary of Galleria Retail Holdings, LLC. Actually, Elias said, his voice quiet but carrying immense finality. I need to discuss your lease agreement, Julian scoffed. Our lease? We have a 20-year lease, hillbilly. You think you know about our lease? Get out. Elias pulled a clean white legal envelope from his pocket. He placed it squarely on the glass countertop. I think I know everything about your lease, Julian, and about your landlord. He pushed the envelope toward Julian. Give this to your owner. It's a notice of a new corporate acquisition, and effective today, the name of your landlord is changing. Julian picked up the envelope, completely dismissive. Acquisition? Who cares? You're going to buy a cow, not a corporate portfolio. Julian ripped open the envelope. Inside, a single sheet of embossed paper stated, Notice of change of ownership. The Grand Galleria shopping mall has been acquired by Snow Horde Development and Asset Management, LLC. Immediate corporate contact, Elias Souza. Julian read the name Elias Souza. He looked at the paper, then at the man in the dirty Lona jacket. The weight of the world, the vast monumental difference between their perceived stations, was about to crash down on him, shifting the emotional arc from frustration to maximum tension. Julian's face went through 3 distinct phases: disbelief, confusion, and finally, burning, absolute shame. He stared at the legal notice, his perfectly sculpted hair suddenly seeming ridiculous, his tweed waistcoat feeling suffocatingly hot. The name Elias Souza meant nothing to him, but the corporate name on the letterhead, Snow Horde Development and Asset Management, LLC, was recognized even by an assistant manager whose world revolved around watches. It was the name associated with the massive, impenetrable agricultural wealth of the region, known for its shrewd, silent investments. Julian slowly lifted his gaze from the document to Elias. The farmer stood silently, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, the mud on his boots suddenly seeming like armor, not grime. Julian remembered his sneering comments, the casual dismissal, the demand that this man, this apparent billionaire developer, be thrown out of the showroom for being too unprofessional. The stakes instantly escalated from a minor humiliation to a catastrophic professional and personal crisis. Julian swallowed hard, the expensive silk tie suddenly feeling like a noose. This can't be right, he stammered, his voice losing its polished edge and cracking into a terrified squeak. The Galleria, it's owned by a massive holding company in New York. There would be months of negotiations, press releases, shareholder meetings. The negotiations were finalized 48 hours ago. Elias interjected, his voice still low, but now carrying the unmistakable authority of ownership. The holding company was eager to offload the failing asset. My company, SJD&AM, specializes in accelerated asset acquisition and turnaround. The sale was closed yesterday afternoon. The nervous couple Julian had been serving backed away, their eyes wide, watching the dramatic confrontation unfold. They weren't interested in the diamond watch anymore. They were captivated by the silent drama involving the dirty farmer, but your lease, Julian desperately argued, grabbing the Kronos Elite lease agreement from beneath the counter. We have a 20-year lease. You can't just throw us out because I asked you to wipe your feet. His panic was palpable. Elias walked slowly to the counter, his movement deliberate, and his massive hand reached out and tapped a specific paragraph in the lease Julian held. Micro-reveal number 5. Elias didn't need to read the fine print. He knew exactly where the vulnerability lay. Section 4, subsection C, paragraph 2, Elias stated, citing the clause from memory, a demonstration of the detailed financial analysis he had completed on the entire property. It states that if the new property owner institutes a significant and immediate structural redevelopment plan that requires access to your leased area, the owner retains the right to terminate the lease with 90 days' notice, provided a relocation fee is offered. My plan includes converting this entire floor into a mixed-use residential lobby, requiring the immediate demolition of all existing retail facades, including this one. That constitutes a significant structural redevelopment. Julian stared at the tiny text, his face draining of blood. He knew instinctively that this simple farmer had outmaneuvered every high-powered lawyer and executive at Galleria Retail Holdings. This wasn't just a threat. It was a perfectly legal, surgical execution of his position. You can't do this, Julian pleaded, his earlier arrogance dissolving into sheer desperation. We are the flagship tenant and we pay premium rent. Who would approve this? Who would approve demolishing the prime retail space? At that moment, the general manager of the entire Galleria shopping mall, Mr. Alistair Finch, burst into the boutique, followed by the equally stunned real estate agent, Carol Vance. Finch was a slick, impeccably dressed man who lived by the rule book, and he looked horrified. Julian, what is going on here? Mies. Vance just informed me the entire mall has been sold. Sold to whom? And who is this man? Finch demanded, pointing accusingly at Elias. Carol Vance, still catching her breath, looked at Finch, her expression a mix of awe and terror. Mr. Finch, this is the new owner, Mr. Elias Souza. He has closed the deal for $68 million, and he has a very specific redevelopment plan. Finch froze. He looked at Elias's dusty coat and then at the acquisition notice in Julian's trembling hand. He was facing the new owner of his entire professional domain. The emergency was now critical. Finch, a master of self-preservation, instantly shifted his tone from confrontation to deference. He extended a nervous hand toward Elias. Mr. Souza, a pleasure. We weren't expecting. Elias ignored the hand. He looked past Finch, his focus still on Julian. Mr. Finch, I have a preliminary matter regarding my new tenancy. This employee, he pointed at Julian, has insulted me, mocked my background, and attempted to refuse me access to a facility I now own, all while I was here on a personal mission to help my dying grandfather. The inclusion of his grandfather's illness added an unexpected emotional blow to Julian's crisis, intensifying the injustice. Julian tried one final desperate defense. He came in here looking like a beggar? He wasn't speaking. How was I supposed to know he was the owner? He's supposed to announce himself. Elias turned to Julian, his voice rising slightly, filled with suppressed emotion. I came in here as a customer, Julian. I came in here as a man seeking help for his family, carrying the dignity of my work. But you saw the mud on my boots and you chose contempt. You chose to judge the value of the man by the fabric of his coat. That is not a business error. That is a failure of character. Finch, realizing the depth of the offense, immediately moved to protect the new owner and his own job. Julian, that is unacceptable. You will apologize to Mr. Souza immediately. You are a representative of this mall. Julian, cornered, eyes flickering between the eviction notice, the furious general manager, and the imposing farmer, felt the shame burning him alive. He had risked everything for a momentary feeling of superiority. Sir, Julian whispered, his head bowed, the word tasting like ash. I apologize. I was mistaken. Elias looked at the groveling salesman. The immediate moment of revenge was achieved, but Elias wasn't done with the material revenge aspect yet. He wanted the structure of contempt to fall, not just the man. Your apology is noted, Julian, Elias said, his voice flat. But it doesn't change the facts. Kronos Elite has 90 days to vacate this space. I am invoking the redevelopment clause. Mr. Finch gasped. Losing the anchor luxury tenant would be a major catastrophe for the mall's profile. Mr. Souza, please. We can't lose Kronos Elite. That would damage the entire brand identity of the Galleria. Elias smiled faintly, the first genuine cold smile since he entered the store. Micro reveal number 6. This was the moment he revealed the true scope of his power, far beyond mere eviction. I agree, Mr. Finch, Elias said. Losing Kronos Elite would indeed damage the mall's brand identity. That is why I won't lose them. I only intend to lose the management that embodies this kind of snobbery. Elias turned to Julian, his blue eyes piercing. Your owner, Galleria Retail Holdings, sold the mall, but Kronos Elite is a subsidiary of that same group. Since I now own the mall, I am the new primary creditor to the holding company. I know their cash flow. They're bleeding capital and are desperate to divest all non-core assets. Elias paused for dramatic effect, ensuring everyone in the room, Julian, Finch, and the stunned couple understood the monumental scale of what he was saying. I didn't just buy the mall, Julian. I bought your holding company's entire outstanding debt 2 days ago. Immediately after I secured the financing from Mr. Harrison, I own the paper, and as of this morning I exercised my option to seize their primary retail assets, which includes the Kronos Elite brand itself, to offset the debt. Elias reached into the envelope again and pulled out a second document, a corporate seizure notice. Effective immediately, Elias announced, his voice ringing with absolute finality. I am the new owner of Kronos Elite, not the landlord. It's the actual owner of the store, the inventory, and all of its corporate assets. Julian, you are not apologizing to a customer. You are apologizing to the man who now owns your watch, your job, and the building you stand in. The shock in the room was electric. The simple farmer had not only bought the mall to evict the salesman, but he had bought the salesman's entire company as well. It was the material revenge climax, delivered with surgical, financial precision. The sudden silence in the Kronos Elite boutique was absolute, broken only by the distant, rhythmic clicking of the expensive timepieces on display. Julian stood frozen, the corporate seizure notice crinkled in his grasp. The man whose boots he had scorned now owned his job, his store, and the ground beneath his feet. The weight of the revelation was immense, transforming the air from luxury perfume to the metallic tong of fear and shock. Mr. Finch, the general manager of the Galleria, recovered first. His professional conditioning instantly kicked in, forcing him to adapt to the new power structure. He approached Elias with a posture of immediate, trembling obedience, ignoring Julian entirely. "Mr. Sousa, congratulations on the successful acquisition. A bold move. I assure you, we will facilitate the immediate corporate transition." I was unaware of the holding company's debt situation. Elias finally met Finch's eyes. The deep blue gaze, chillingly devoid of warmth. "I am aware, Mr. Finch. I did my homework. My farming business taught me that if the soil is rich, the seeds, or in this case, the debt, will always yield a harvest. Now, regarding the management of this asset, Kronos Elite." He gestured dismissively toward Julian, who was still speechless, his eyes darting frantically. This employee proved that he is not fit to represent the quality or the values of a luxury brand. He lacks respect for labor, and he lacks judgment. Elias turned to Mr. Ivo, the kindly, elderly watchmaker, who had emerged from the back workshop, attracted by the commotion. Ivo, holding a tiny loop, looked at the chaos with calm confusion. "Mr. Ivo," Elias said, his voice instantly softening, filled with genuine respect. "You restored my grandfather's watch out of kindness and professional integrity. You saw the value of history and the dignity of a man's last wish, even when your front-of-house staff saw only dirt." Ivo, still wiping his hands on a rag, looked surprised. "It was just an old watch, son. It deserved to run." "Exactly," Elias affirmed. He turned back to the room, the contrast between the two employees, the arrogant salesman and the humble artisan, providing the perfect moment for justice. Justice validation moment. "Mr. Finch, as the new owner of Kronos Elite, I am instituting an immediate management restructuring. Mr. Ivo, effective immediately. You are the new store manager and master watchmaker-in-chief of Kronos Elite. You will be given a significant raise, a complete refurbishment of your workshop, and full autonomy to run this store with the integrity you already possess. Your only instruction is to ensure that every single person who walks through this door is treated with respect, regardless of what they wear or what they buy." Mr. Ivo dropped his loop in shock. "Me? But I only work with the mechanisms, Mr. Sousa. I don't know the spreadsheets." "You know the mechanisms of character, Ivo?" Elias replied, his lips twitching slightly. "We can teach you the spreadsheets, but we cannot teach Julian what you already possess." Julian finally found his voice, a high-pitched, desperate plea. "But sir, Mr. Sousa, I have sales records. I have been here 5 years. He's just a clock fixer. I'm the face of the brand." Elias pivoted to face Julian directly, his towering presence seeming to shrink the entire boutique. "You are the face of arrogance, Julian, and that face is now terminated. You are dismissed from Kronos Elite, effective immediately. Collect your personal belongings, and Mr. Finch will provide your severance package and ensure you are escorted from the premises." The crowd, the bewildered couple, and the now awestruck Carol Vance watched the dramatic reversal unfold. The man Julian had mocked was not just the landlord. He was the executioner of his career. Julian, his face a mask of shame and disbelief, began hyperventilating. His life's foundation, his status, his perfectly curated environment had been destroyed in 5 minutes by a man whose boots he had ridiculed. He looked down at the Persian rug, the one he had protected so fiercely, and now he saw it not as a symbol of luxury, but as the site of his downfall. "You can't do this. This is personal revenge," Julian screamed, his voice echoing hysterically. Elias simply stared at him, calm and composed, the embodiment of quiet power. "It is justice, Julian. You chose to humiliate me based on surface appearance. I chose to correct your mistake by operating on the only surface you understand, the balance sheet." He then made a critical gesture. He walked to the main display case, picked up the diamond-encrusted watch that Julian had been showing the wealthy couple, and deliberately carried it back to the workshop entrance. He handed the ridiculously expensive timepiece worth more than Julian's annual salary to Mr. Ivo. "Ivo, sell this piece," Elias commanded. Take the proceeds and use them to buy new floor mats for the showroom. Heavy-duty rubber ones, the kind that welcome dirt, not reject it. I want people to feel comfortable here, not judged. The resolution was complete. The ultimate material revenge was executed. The antagonist was fired by the victim using the antagonist's own company. And the symbol of arrogance, the Persian rug and the diamond watch, was being immediately replaced by a symbol of humility and welcome, the rubber mats and the promotion of the honest craftsman, Mr. Finch. Quickly moved to usher the sobbing, defeated Julian toward the back exit. As Julian was led away, he stumbled over the counter, leaving a visible, greasy smear on the polished glass. A final, pathetic act of defiance against the cleanliness he prized. Elias watched him go. He felt a wave of profound, exhausted satisfaction. It wasn't about the money. It was about the dignity restored, not just for himself, but for the countless others who had been dismissed by the Julians of the world. He then turned back to Carol Vance and Mr. Finch. Now, Mr. Finch, let's discuss the immediate structural redevelopment of the Galleria. I want a complete rezoning of the top 2 floors for residential units, and I want the plans on my desk by Monday. And Carol, he said, turning to the stunned real estate agent, I'll need you to manage the entire leasing transition. I will be working from the Snow Jorge farm. My office is wherever my boots happen to be standing. He retrieved his hat, gave a respectful nod to Mr. Ivo, the new manager of the luxury brand, and walked out of the store. He did not rush. He walked slowly, deliberately, his muddy boots crunching on the perfect wooden floor, knowing that the soil he carried was the true source of his immense, quiet power. His grandfather's watch was ticking steadily in his pocket. The hours following the dramatic revelation at Kronos Elite were a silent testament to the power of capital and dignity. Elias did not linger in the city. He drove his rusty pickup straight back to the quiet familiarity of Snow Jorge farm. He spent the evening by his grandfather's bedside, the elderly man thin and frail, but his spirit buoyed by the gentle, steady tick of the restored Omega pocket watch, now resting securely on the bedside table. Elias told him nothing of the mall acquisition, only that the watchmaker, Mr. Ivo, was a good and honest man who had fixed the mechanism with great care. The satisfaction Elias felt was deep and internal, a quiet resonance that eclipsed the loud, chaotic victory of the boardroom. Meanwhile, in the city, the repercussions were swift and decisive. Julian's termination was confirmed by Mr. Finch, who personally oversaw the installation of the heavy-duty rubber floor mats at Kronos Elite, a symbolic act that immediately signaled the new ownership's philosophy. The diamond-encrusted watch was sold in a private sale. The funds used exactly as Elias commanded to furnish the expanded state-of-the-art workshop Mr. Ivo had dreamt of. Mr. Ivo, overwhelmed but steady, stepped into his new role as manager. He kept his hands busy with the micromechanics of watches, delegating the paperwork to a newly hired administrator. He made one immediate pivotal change. He placed a small, simple wooden sign near the entrance, replacing the former gilded plaque. It read, "All are welcome. Your time is valued." Mr. Finch, anxious to prove his loyalty to the new landlord, worked through the weekend with Carol Vance, the real estate agent, who was now utterly galvanized by Elias's vision. She realized that true profit wasn't in quick sales, but in long-term visionary development. They finalized the initial drafts for the residential conversion, immediately realizing that Elias's proposed re-engineering of the mall's entire structure was brilliant. It would transform a dying retail center into a high-demand, mixed-use commercial and residential hub. The Grand Galleria shopping mall was reborn. A year had passed, and the transformation was almost unrecognizable. The exterior, once faded, now gleamed, topped by a vast, discrete solar array that significantly reduced utility costs, exactly as Elias had planned. The old, inefficient traffic flow was gone, replaced by smart, layered access points that blended retail patrons with the new residential tenants on the upper 2 floors, whose rent revenue provided a rock-solid financial anchor for the entire project. The property, bought for $68 million, was now appraised at over $150 million. Elias the farmer remained the quiet power behind the scenes. He delegated the day-to-day management entirely to a highly competent farm-to-table development team, keeping his office at Snow Jorge, dealing with the mall's operation only through weekly video conferences. He still wore his Lona jacket and muddy boots, but they were now seen in the city not as a sign of poverty, but as an eccentric, powerful badge of authenticity. The antagonist Julian, unable to cope with the shock and shame of his public defeat, was last known to be working a series of temporary, low-wage jobs, unable to secure a position in any luxury retail sector again. His reputation for arrogance, fueled by the viral story of the farmer and the mall, had preceded him. Ensuring his punishment was professional exile and humbling financial struggler. Direct contrast to the struggle he had imposed on others. Kronos Elite, under Mr. Ivo, the store flourished. It had not only retained its high-end clients, but it attracted a new, younger demographic that appreciated its welcoming atmosphere and the story of integrity behind the brand. Ivo had hired several new apprentices, all trained not just in horology but in courtesy and respect. The store's new signature piece was not a diamond watch, but a limited edition reproduction of Elias's grandfather's Omega, marketed with the tagline, "A timeless classic built on respect." Elias's grandfather, having lived to see his watch restored and the crops brought in for another season, passed away peacefully 6 months after the acquisition. Elias kept the Omega watch, sometimes wearing it on the farm, its rhythmic ticking a constant reminder of the simple values that fueled his most complex corporate move. One afternoon, Elias was in the city for one of his rare site visits. He pulled his rusty pickup into the newly designated owner-developer parking spot beneath the Galleria Small, amusing concession to his status. He walked into the now bustling lobby, filled with the energy of new tenants and redesigned retail spaces. As he walked past Kronos Elite, he paused. Mr. Ivo was standing proudly at the entrance, supervising the delivery of a new state-of-the-art diagnostic machine for the workshop. A young man dressed in a sharp, modern suit, a high-level manager from one of the Galleria's new tech tenants, rushed through the lobby, dropping a keycard near the welcoming, heavy-duty rubber floor mats Mr. Ivo had installed. He stopped, annoyed, and glanced at Elias, who was standing still, observing the scene. The manager hesitated, seeing the boots and the Lona jacket. He almost said something dismissive, a habit of the fast-paced corporate world. But then he noticed the small wooden sign over the Kronos' Elite doorway, and he noticed the quiet confidence radiating from the man in the dirty coat. Instead of demanding Elias move, the manager simply said, "Excuse me, sir. Busy day." He retrieved his card and hurried off, his earlier arrogance checked by the new atmosphere of the mall. Elias walked over to Mr. Ivo. "The mats are working well, Ivo," he noted. "They keep the floor clean and they teach a lesson, Mr. Souza," Ivo replied, adjusting his master watchmaker's apron. Elias nodded, looking at the vibrant, successful ecosystem he had created. He had bought a mall and a company, not for greed, but to deliver a focused public message. The true power was not in the acquisition, but in the transformation. He walked toward his elevator, which now took him to the penthouse-level offices overlooking the entire city. The farmer, who was humiliated for having dirty feet, proved that the dirt was only the foundation of a monumental fortune and a far superior character. Universal message was clear: never mistake humility for inability, or never underestimate the depth of a man who chooses the authenticity of labor over the superficial shine of wealth. Subscribe, like, and comment your location. If Elias decides to expand his retail acquisitions, which corrupt, arrogant business do you think he should buy next?